The American Civil War started in 1861 when Southern troops fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. It ended in 1865 when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army to Union General Ulysses S. Grant in Virginia. In those 4 years, the Civil War took more American lives than any other war in history. It so divided Americans that, in some families, brothers fought against brothers. It pitted the North against the South, slavery against abolitionists, and left a heritage of grief and mistrust that still exists today. Hi, my name is Elisha Morris. I witnessed the war firsthand. I was one of the youngest soldiers ever to serve in the American Civil War. This is my story. "200 years ago, the northern and southern halves of the United States had grown in very different ways. The North was an industrialized nation that produced 3/4 of America's wealth. The South was an agricultural society without many skilled workers. Most of the people were farmers. Southern farms, known as plantations, grew cotton, rice, sugarcane, and tobacco. Slaves did most of the work on the plantations. When Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer born in Kentucky, was campaigning to become president in 1860, he said he was against the practice of slavery. If elected, he promised to free the slaves living in America. Many Southerners threatened to secede from the Union and form their own country if Lincoln became president. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the election. Before he even took office, Southerners made good on their promise. By December 20th, South Carolina seceded and became the first Confederate state in America. One by one, Southern states continued to secede. Before long, 11 states and some 9 million Southerners, including almost 4 million slaves, joined the Confederacy. In the spring of 1861, there were Union forts located all across the new Confederate states, and Southerners wanted the Union soldiers to leave their land. In Charleston, South Carolina, Union troops refused to evacuate Fort Sumter. Early on the morning of April 12th, Confederate rebels aimed 50 cannons at Fort Sumter and began firing. When the smoke cleared, 3,000 shells had pounded the fortifications, and the Northern troops had been driven out. With his soldiers now retreating back north, President Lincoln was forced to act. 3 days after Fort Sumter was attacked, he called out 75,000 Northern militiamen. The Civil War had begun. Southerners then set about building an army to defend themselves from the Union. Organizing the army was the job of each individual state, not the federal or Confederate governments. Just about every able-bodied man on both sides answered the call to arms, including my father.
Run! My mom had died a year earlier from a very bad disease, and my dad was getting ready to go to the war, and I couldn't take care of that house by myself because I didn't know what to do, so he packed up everything and put it in the cellar, and he locked up the house, and we took off towards the war. We signed up, and I've been in the war ever since.
Because we lived on a farm in the South, near the city of Atlanta, in Georgia, we volunteered in Georgia's 42nd Infantry.
The center files will deploy from there.
I am the drummer boy, and I'm responsible for keeping the men in step and giving them the commands that the commanders can't do.
While I served in the Confederate Army, my older brother, Andrew, fought for the North.
Sing it like we used to sing it, 50,000 strong.
Andrew had moved to Pennsylvania when our mother died, so he joined the Union Army there.
When the war first started, I mean, of course, everybody wanted to be a part of it because it was a thing to do, and they had pressure from their towns, you know, because it's in the Victorian era, if you didn't go out and fight, you know, you were a coward, and if you were a coward in your hometown, where are you going to go to then? So both armies, a lot of men tried to enlist from ages anywhere from 8 to 15. Fighting men were anywhere from 17 to early 30s and 40s.
In many families like ours, brothers were often forced to fight against one another.
It was the thing to do because everybody thought it would be a short war. Nobody expected a four-year-long bloody war. Nobody expected that.
The North had a bigger army, including thousands of black soldiers. The North also had better equipment and supplies to fight with. But the South had an advantage. Most of the war was fought on Southern soil, and Southerners were fighting for their homeland. And some say the South had better generals, including Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson. President Lincoln tried several commanders for the Union Army and finally settled on two generals who became famous, Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman. The Northern troops called us Rebs, or Johnny Reb, short for rebels. Southern rebels wore gray, and we called the Union soldiers Billy Yank, or Yank, for Yankee. Union troops were given dark blue uniforms. And some soldiers who couldn't afford uniforms, especially in the South, fought in their own clothes. In the early days of the war, factories couldn't make uniforms fast enough, so it was often hard to tell which side a soldier was on. That was confusing on the battlefield. Soldiers risked being shot by their own side.
The Confederates were more like, I don't want to say ragtag, but they were more loosely confederated, loosely, you know, together. The Federal Army always tried to keep a bigger sense of, you know, order.
Order on.
Since I was only 14, I couldn't carry a rifle and fight, but young boys served in other ways.
During battle, most of them were the powder monkeys, which bring the charges to the big cannons, or they would be the drummer boy, so they could keep their men in step. With all the commanders and stuff, they'd be shouting commands, and over all the cannon fire and gunfire, they couldn't actually hear them. So with the drummer boy, they would beat on the drum, and the soldiers would know what they were saying, so they would do whatever they were commanded to do.
My cousin Thomas became the drummer for the 63rd Tennessee Volunteer Regiment.
My father was killed in the war, and I decided I would avenge his death, and so I joined the army, and I couldn't fire a gun, so my only options was the drum or the fife, and I liked the drum more than the fife. So I decided to beat the drum.
Drummers spent hours practicing because soldiers really depended on the different commands we relayed to them.
Young boys were also used as runners because when you're in a battlefield scenario, there's lots of smoke going on and sounds and stuff, and you'd have to relay orders quick. So they would send the little boys with an order over to a general and tell them advance your troops here or do something, or fall back or whatever. They were also assistant to medics, so what they would do, they would follow the infantry in the rear, and when casualties started being taken, they would come by and give them water, help them out, give them a bandage if they needed it, or just give them comfort if they wanted to, or talk to them. They were in the field while the fight was going on and just staying in the rear, so if a stray bullet got by.
Yes, it was dangerous because if you're so little and you become a messenger at the wrong time, you could get shot or something might happen or you might start a fire on an accident. It was very dangerous.
Well, last year my drum got destroyed in the battle. I put it down to untie something and a cannon shot and my drum exploded, so I have to be in the artillery now. I'm a powder monkey and I bring the charges to the cannon so they can load them and fire them at the enemy.
No matter which side you were on, soldiers had much of the same equipment and clothing. If you were in the cavalry, your most important weapon was your horse. Most cavalry soldiers fought with pistols, rifles, and a saber. If you were in the infantry, you carried a muzzle-loading rifle with a bayonet we could attach to the barrel if we wanted. You carried your ammunition in a cartridge box, along with a canteen slung over your shoulder. Civil War rifles could fire only one shot at a time, but they were much more accurate than weapons used in previous wars.
You had the first machine gun, you had grenades, you had the first submarine, you had, in these rifles were so accurate. They were rifled muskets, and they were effective with 300 yards.
Every soldier carried a canteen so he'd have water to drink, even my little cousin Caleb. Since both armies were always on the move, at night we slept in large tent cities set up quickly near a supply of water and wood for our fires. In camp, we had time to relax, but there was always work to do. Soldiers who fought were responsible for keeping their own weapons in working condition. Even though life in camp was crude, we did what we could to make it seem like home.
King Kong, kitty, kitty, cameo. Emo, camo, there, oh my, with a high and a ho, and here comes Sally singing sometimes pity with an 8-top nip cat. King Kong, kitty, kitty, cameo. I heard a boatman go, not a somebody go down.
Just about the only women you'd find around the camps were the nurses who cared for the sick and wounded, but they also helped cook our meals.
Potatoes in here, carrots, onions. Food was scarce. There was not a lot around, and whatever they found when they foraged, that's what they used. And I found some beans, and we made some bean soup, and we had a little bit of ham from an old ham bone. They ate a lot of hardtack. That was something that they were issued. A lot of salt pork. Hardtack is a nice hard cracker. Really, really hard. It came in a crate. Sometimes they were so old that you would have to knock the maggots out of it. But they'd keep on eating it. A lot of them would soak it, like in their bacon grease or whatever they had to make it softer, because a lot would probably break off their teeth because it was that hard. We ground our own coffee. And what we did, we put it in just a piece of linen, and our coffee beans are in here. It was a tough life. We didn't live very long. It was rough following the Army and just living this life in a tent.
In all, Civil War battles took a terrible toll in human lives. An army often had 25% of its men killed, wounded, or captured in a major battle.
When you're looking at them and you see 1,000 men firing at you, it's very tough. It's very tough to stay alive.
The Civil War would be long and bloody. As the war raged on, President Lincoln made good on his promise to free the slaves. On September 22, 1862, he issued his Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all slaves in the South would be forever free. This only infuriated Southerners, who vowed to fight to the finish. Famous battles were fought at Bull Run in Northern Virginia, Shiloh in Tennessee, Antietam in Maryland, Chancellorsville in Virginia, where one of the South's greatest generals, Stonewall Jackson, was mortally wounded by one of his own soldiers. There were more bloody encounters at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, Vicksburg, Chickamauga, Atlanta, and in Savannah. In all, over 600,000 Americans were killed between 1861 and 1865. More than 1 million soldiers were injured, more than in any other war. In the end, the superior numbers of Union troops, the length of the war, and the wealth of the North proved an advantage for the Union. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate Army to General Ulysses S. Grant at the village of Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The Civil War was over. When we returned to our farm near Atlanta, it was a completely different place. The entire South had been devastated by the Civil War. The Southern way of life was lost. The Yankees' ideals, which stressed hard work, education, and economic freedom, became the standard for all the United States. Although those ideals helped build our country into the modern industrial power that it is today, everyone would agree that the Civil War was a terrible price to pay.